Okay, so a construction worker with no formal schooling downloads exotic physics from a blue alien being, and that physics is now being vindicated at the highest levels of government and aerospace. Sounds about right for 2025.
All right, betters, I don't know a better way to say this, so I'm just going to say it. Apparently, a former construction worker one day had an experience with some blue aliens who, after that experience, he became a genius. Essentially, that's sort of the idea. All right, I'm going to let Jesse Michaels explain. You see, this gentleman named Dave Rossi went on Jesse Michaels to tell his story, again, about going from being a construction worker to sort of a savant, right, in physics. Let's break it down.
This interview was one of the most baffling and intriguing I've ever done on this show. Today, we will talk to a former construction worker. He was down and out and just scraping by. He then developed an interest in UFOs. Then, he had an interaction with a blue alien being that, according to him, caused him to do a deep dive into quantum physics. All of this sounded pretty crazy when I first heard about it. But since meeting this next guest, I've introduced him to a Navy scientist who's worked at the highest levels of government. Even he was extremely impressed and intrigued by this former construction worker's findings. I know all of this sounds insane, but it's true. Our next guest was also spotted by the legendary Hal Puthoff and Eric Davis, who have also noted his impressive knowledge in areas of unorthodox science.
Dr. Davis, thank you so very much for being here today.
Oh, thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here.
A lot of this guest's interests in physics are in a special branch of it called extended electrodynamics. The scientific savant himself, David Rossi. I'm here with Dave Rossi.
All right, so I know what you're thinking, and no disrespect to Mr. Rossi. You know, this sounds crazy, right? All of a sudden you have I guess you get a download from these beings, and now, you know, that's turning into something, right? Something big that you got. Why? What are the odds that the aliens would give it to this guy that would turn into something bigger, right? Does it make sense? Like, what are the odds he is the guy that's chosen? You know what I mean? It's just one of these. I just don't understand it. I mean, honestly, it just sounds like Mr. Rossi's a smart guy. Period. Right? Sounds like a smart guy. Doesn't need aliens giving him information. It's hard to tell if he got that information and is just passing it off, or is now has a superior bandwidth up in the brain. Okay, if you know what I'm saying, right? Like, did he become smarter and therefore came up with these ideas, or is he saying he got the idea and then just passed it off, but he's still the same old, right? It doesn't sound like it, right? As you'll hear from Mr. Rossi here in just a second, you know, I just can't imagine that. I guess I'm just so confused on this whole idea. But look, let's give Mr. Rossi a chance to sort of explain for himself how he had this encounter and what came of it.
I'm going to sleep one evening, and it felt like, I don't want to use the word abducted because I think that implies that there was some negative connotation to the experience, which in this case for me, graciously, there wasn't. But I remember essentially being, I guess you could say, taken by a blue energy type humanoid, if you will. There were no physical characteristics. It was just pure blue energy. And I really couldn't tell.
Why do you say humanoid when you say?
Well, because it had 2 arms, 2 legs. It was just significantly taller than you or I, for example, height-wise. And so,
and when you say no physical characteristics, it was like you could move right through it with your hand or something.
Essentially, yes.
Like a plasma being or
basically,
something.
very not really dense whatsoever, sort of like, right, a plasma, electric plasma type being. And I recall, I can't say for certain because I don't know if it was a physical experience or a purely energetic or spiritual one, but sure. I recall opening my eyes and I saw all this basically white light around me, but it seemed like it was a very convex type structure. And then I recall I felt like I was very drowsy, and I recalled seeing this this blue being basically standing very close to my head. And then next thing I knew, I basically closed my eyes, and I woke up the next morning, and I had all of a sudden this extreme drive and inclination to study electrical engineering and quantum physics in particular, and I knew absolutely nothing about it. I failed math, I think, almost every year of high school. And so I spent the first 2 years from there basically learning. I had made some videos where I had discussed these type of concepts on my channel. Without getting into specifics name-wise, I was noticed by a handful of very nice gentlemen that seemingly saw some potential to what I was saying from a physics and engineering perspective. Gave some presentations to those individuals, and since then continued to learn. Many cups of coffees later, many late nights spent just reading papers.
All right, so it kind of sounds like he, had this experience and got the urge to study things he had never thought about before, and then was capable of studying them when he wasn't capable before, right? And he's also not sure if it was a spiritual sort of like what happened exactly to him, So he's already got a podcast in place, so he's able to just put that on his own podcast and continue the work. So he's like a year and a half into his podcast, and he's able to essentially, he has this experience, right? And then basically is a different person, right? Essentially. But again, he seems like a smart guy for sure. I'm getting like Terrence Howard vibes, good or bad, take that for what you will. I like his interviews, they're fascinating. If anything, they're, entertainment, but Dave definitely seems like a smart guy, and this seems like an interesting experience. Has anyone else had any sort of experience like this? Let me know in the comments. And he's also had a lot of experiences since, that initial experience, right? Here's a compilation from the interview of some other, exciting things he said.
These were shown to me by this being as slinkies, so to speak, that exist all around us. You can use the potentials that exist all around us right now in the quantum vacuum to surveil an entire room.
How would you do that?
I don't want to say because it starts to overlap into stuff that's sensitive. I know a group that is working in the government that has been working on this since the 90s. And they've had massive success. There are things that I've seen in private laboratories that are undeniable and verified by people other than myself in those facilities.
And look, we can be a little skeptical about what Dave is claiming for sure, but, just to be fair to all of this, Jesse said this at the beginning of the interview, which I found to be quite interesting. And stay tuned for one other cool thing about the interview with Dave.
We recorded this interview in early December of 24. And at the time of its recording, extended electrodynamics was considered quackery, something you might hear at a zero-point energy conference somewhere in the Southwest from a crystal healer. But right after we recorded this podcast, the National Science Foundation and NASA co-sponsored a podcast with some elite scientists and engineers with serious credentials claiming to investigate, you guessed it, extended electrodynamics. I've also heard from multiple other Navy whistleblowers that this framework is very, very real and useful.
When you introduce the scalar field, you now have the possibility of at least 3 completely new kinds of waves.
Who's that Saw character there at the end? I mean, that was a little scary. Anyway, some secret scientist, So it's kind of interesting that, after they recorded their podcast, this, revelation happens, right, about the specific thing that he's studying. I don't know. Is that a coincidence? It could be, it could not be. I'm not too sure. But one other thing that's kind of interesting is this.
But this former construction worker hasn't only agreed to come on my show, he's agreed to speak with any scientist at any level about his theories on my show as a follow-up. I thought that was a pretty decent show of confidence.
All right, so look, he wants to go toe-to-toe with different scientists. Props to him. He's willing to have a debate and some discussion. I think that's cool. But I will say it doesn't really, equal that because he may be able to go toe-to-toe or even have some pretty relevant conversations with some scientists that he didn't just have this in him to begin with. You know what I mean? Because, even Albert Einstein failed math. That doesn't mean anything, right? He also failed math, right? Like this idea that, I think he probably already had this in him. He found something he was interested in, and I don't know. It's one of those things that I guess we'll never know. But this is quite interesting for sure. It's kind of impossible for him to prove, but really, does it matter? I don't know if it does. Right? It's more like if he does uncover some cool stuff and he works with other people and they uncover cool things and things that move the needle and new physics and whatever. I mean, who cares? Right? If it came from him or aliens or whatever, I mean, at the end of the day, right? But, look, go check out the full interview. The link's in the description. Make up your own mind. It is an interesting story, and Dave seems like a really cool guy, so either way, look forward to seeing his work and what they come up with. All right, betters, we'll see you in the next one. Remember, every day's a gift, y'all. Peace.
I live inside my own world of make-believe. Kids screaming in the cradles, profanities. I see the world through ice covered in ink and bleach. Cross out the ones who heard my cries and watched me weep.